This poem is about my mother and her desire to settle down in one place at one particular time and have real roots, and the extent to which it wasn't possible because there was always somebody, usually the father, to come and say, let's move on somewhere else. And the poem deals with the fact that she always had, I'm sure, and thinking back on it, this sense that waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the order to come. One day soon he'll tell her it's time to start packing, and the kids will yell truly and get wildly excited for no reason, and the brown kelpie pup will start dashing about, tripping everyone up, and she'll go out to the vegetable patch and pick all the green tomatoes from the vines, and notice how the oldest girl is close to tears because she was happy here, and how the youngest girl is beaming because she wasn't. And the first thing she'll put on the trailer will be the bottling set she never unpacked from Grovedale. And when the loaded ute bumps down the drive past the blackberry canes with their last shriveled fruit, she won't even ask why they're leaving this time or where they're heading for. She'll only remember how when they came here she held out her hands, bright with berries, the first of the season, and said, "Make a wish, Tom, make a wish."
As well as moving about a lot, your father was often away from home. Why was he away so much?
Well, sometimes he was looking for work, and sometimes I think he was just in a disagreeable sort of mode with as far as Mum was concerned. And again, all these things washed over me because I was too young to know, and in one sense too young to care. But I realised, looking back on it, how much there must have been a lot of tension there for this to happen so often. But Brother was always there, and he was the other constant sort of fixed point in my early memories, along with Mum and the younger of two sisters.
What kind of work did your father do?
He was a farm labourer, so given that I was born as the Depression started to deepen in 1930, those years of my memory of him, of course, were the years when he was finding it hardest anyway to find work. So he went looking for work, and later on then my brother went looking for work too and brought home, I don't know what my father did with the limited money he had, but my brother certainly didn't spend it on himself. He brought it home to keep the family going.
Your father had various enterprises too, didn't he?
Yeah, well, they were kind of joint enterprises in a way, you know, they planned at one stage to have a fox farm, breed foxes for their skins. In the end, I think they got rid of the foxes anyway. And they at a later stage had a horse they'd invested in. I think a bit of a sort of swayback nag actually, but it was called Pink Lady, and they had great hopes for it winning back and redeeming the family fortunes that it never did. My dad, he didn't live with us. He lived out in a shed, cooked his own potato chips, lonely went to bed. He was handsome with high cheekbones. His eyes were steel blue. The stories he told were mostly lies, but he made you wish them true. He had a little red fox cub and kept it on a chain. It ran around in circles all day long. Pain, pain, pain. He'd sit it upon his shoulder and walk around the place, and even Mother couldn't keep a smile from her face. Run, little red fox, run, run, run. Run, little red fox, run. One day he looked at me and said, "We all want to be free, the wild birds, the tame birds, that fox cub and me." He took the chain from around his neck. "You're on your own," he said. The fox cub ran and ran around in circles. Finally he dropped dead. Oh, how he wept when he picked it up. Oh, how he broke down then. You see how it is, son, see how it is, with foxes and with men. Run, little red fox, run, run, run. Run, little red fox, run.
How old were you when you wrote your first poem?
Well, I started writing as a young kid. The younger of my two older sisters was a very talented writer, I think. She published some poems, I think, in the Herald newspaper. And the general support of the family was there all the time. They thought Bruce was always supposed to be, a clever young fellow. Not half as clever as I think they thought he was, but I wasn't going to disappoint them or disillusion them about that.
So where did you come in the family?
I came fourth, so that was the end of the line. But I was in fact 20 plus years younger than my brother and sisters, so they stood as more or less aunt and uncle to me. And kindly ones at that. So I was very lucky. I didn't have any sibling rivalry because I had no siblings in that sense.
Was your mother ambitious for you?
I'm sure she was. I was the one person that had an education beyond primary school. Most of them didn't finish primary school. I don't think my brother finished primary school. They were pulled out of school, as so many people were, at an early age because of the necessities of family finances. But I was still the person who'd gone to high school, which was an enormous jump from people who hadn't finished primary school.
But you dropped out before you finished high school. Can you remember what precipitated that? Given that your mother was wanting you to go on and you were a clever young fellow who wasn't going to disappoint anyone, why did you drop out just then?
Well, I'd had some sort of difference of agreement, you might say, with my maths teacher, and I remember storming out of the classroom and being ordered to come back and close the door properly, which I, being an obedient person, came back and did. But that was my last class. And I went home. On my way, I caught the tram home, and I stopped off at a lending library to take out some Ellery Queen books. That was my sort of act of emancipation, was to read some Ellery Queen mystery stories. So that's how I left school. I went home and proudly declared that I'd sort of finished with school. And I got a job then in a lawyer's office. And at the end of a year, the junior partner said to me, well, you don't seem to be sort of making that much progress. Would you like a week's pay or a week's notice? And I said, I'll settle for a week's pay. And so it was, I always believe in sort of quick finishes, So I took a whole succession of different jobs, most of which, one reason or another, I didn't last too long at.
Were you living at home with your mother during this time?
Well, some of the times I was living with Mum, sometimes I wasn't. When she went to the final trip to the hospital, I was still living with her. At other times I wasn't, but I'd had a big disagreement with her. She thought, this is long after the Fox Farm kind of fantasy, that breeding peaks was the way to go. And in the end, I came home breeding peaks, P-E-K-S, Pekingese dogs, and we didn't have the money or the facilities for that kind of activity. And I remember coming home. I'd worked hard, and this is public works, labouring work, at a place called Rosanna out of Melbourne. Caught a train into Melbourne, then the train another 40 minutes out to Baroni where we lived, and then a mile walk from the station. And I'd find there was no tea for me when I got home at 7 o'clock at night. And I remember saying to her one day, it's either me or the peaks. And she said, well, it's the peaks. And I left the following morning. With some, but I didn't lose contact with the family, and I'd go and visit them, and so it wasn't as though I was never seen or heard from again. But it was just that for a young bloke, I suppose, I would have been around about, 18, 19. My temper got the better of me, and it was just as well, I suppose, that it did, because had I not been in Melbourne, I would never have gone to university. I went to night school, I did out matric, I went to university, and the rest of my life has been different from there. And although I was tempted quite often to leave the studying at night school after the day's work, I was always implored by my night school teacher to come back, often tearfully, and I always came back, a woman's tears, I'm a sucker for them, always was. So I came back, I finished off the matriculation and then went to university the following year.
So although you'd committed yourself very eagerly to do this adult matriculation, you almost dropped out of that.
Oh yes, sure, yeah.
This dropping out, again, looking back to it with the wisdom of hindsight, was it always just that you were fed up, or was it also a little bit that you wondered whether you could do it?
I suspect a bit of both, Robin. In one sense, I guess that's always there. I've never been overconfident about my capacity for taking on new things. So, you know, I think that was part of it. It was also that if your working life is among guys who are just sort of, well, guys who've never been to high school, for example, and you're aware that you're using some kind of camouflage to keep in with them and to learn to operate within their sort of expectations, and then you have to switch off every evening to become a person who's studying French and studying English literature at matriculation level. Then, especially in those days, I'm talking about the early 1950s. It was a bit of a switch you had to do on a sort of on a weekly basis.
You went to university immediately after you matriculated, did you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did you find? How was that?
Oh, it was great. Early 50s, I was mostly mixing with people who'd gone to sort of posh colleges and top high schools rather than dropouts from high school. But they were very magnanimous. And again, I mean, I was lucky because I could have met a time where other people, writers like Philip Martin, Evan Jones, Vin Buckley, Chris Wallace Crabb, were all there or had recently graduated or already teaching there. And they were universally magnanimous, universally generous. And I could have probably gone at some other time to some other place and found myself seen because I did write while I was there and publish while I was there, as a threat or as a pest or a bit of both. But in fact, I met none of that. And that was terribly important to me and still is. So I wrote those prose sketches, the Joey Cassidy series that Penguin brought out, mostly really as a kind of farewell to an idiom which I expect I was going to leave behind. That is the sort of working class idiom and the working class background that I came from and that I'd worked in.
Were you surprised when you failed?
No, not at all. No, I knew I was failing, and I always remembered, I guess, those lines from Richard II where he says, "I wasted time, and now doth time waste me." I knew I was for the chopper, and I was quite philosophic about it. I didn't hold the university to account for it. It was simply my own fault. I'd read widely but not well, and so that was the end of that.
And when you left university and you started on a series of jobs again, what happened for you?
Well, I did handyman gardening, although I'm not much of a handyman and not much more of a gardener, but I did that for a while. And then I joined the post office as a postman in around where I lived. So I was able to go to the local post office, throw off my mail in the day and take it on a walk around. And I enjoyed that very much for a couple of years. It started early and finished about 4:30 with a layoff in the middle. So it was kind of a longish day, and it was really enjoyable, but not, as it were, doing anything else. I suppose I wanted companionship more than anything, so I thought I'd join the services.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1.
When I say eyes right, I want to hear those eyeballs click and the gentle pitter-patter of falling dandruff. You there, what's the matter? Why are you looking at me? Are you a queer? Look to your front. If you had one more brain, it'd be lonely. What are you laughing at, you in the back row with the unsightly fat between your elephant ears? Open that drain you call a mind and listen. Remember first the cockpit drill. When you go down, be sure the old crown jewels are safely tucked away. What could be more distressing than to hold off with a burst from your trusty weapon, a mob of the little yellows only to find back home because of your position, your chances of turning the key in the ignition considerably reduced. All right, now, suppose for the sake of argument you've got a number 1 blockage and a brand new pack of Charlies are coming at you. You can smell their rotten fish sauce breath hot on the back of your stupid neck. All right, now, what are you going to do about it? That's right, grab and check the magazine, man. It's not a woman's tit, worse luck or you'd be set. Too late, you nit, they're on you and your tripes around your neck. You've copped the bloody lot, just like I said, and you know what you are, you're dead, dead, dead.
During the Vietnam War, your opposition was very public, very strongly articulated. How did that sit with the people that you were working with in the Air Force, Dawe?
Nobody ever worried a bit. I mean, the Air Force of the 3 services is the most junior, of course, and also the most apolitical. They didn't worry Continental. I mean, every RAF library had copies of my books. There was an item in the Sydney Morning Herald once which said anti-war poet goes to war, which wasn't true. I wasn't going to war, I was only going to Malaysia. They didn't worry a bit. Had it been the Navy or the Army, I would have probably been hauled over the coals. But no, they didn't take offence. I was winning a few prizes and so on, which helped to perhaps redeem me, but I don't think in most cases they read the poems. Or if they did, they thought, well, you know, poetry being what it is, who else will read this anyway? So it never in any way reflected on my sort of relationship with either officers or other Air Force personnel. All day, day after day, they're bringing them home. They're picking them up, those they can find, and bringing them home. They're bringing them in piled on the hulls of Grants, in trucks, in convoys. They're zipping them up in green plastic bags. They're tagging them now in Saigon. In the mortuary coolness, they're giving them names. They're rolling them out of the deep freeze lockers. On the tarmac at Tan Son Nhut, the noble jets are whining like hounds. They are bringing them home. Curly heads, kinky hairs, crew cuts, balding non-coms. They're high now, high and higher over the land of steaming Chow Min. Their shadows are tracing the blue curve of the Pacific with sorrowful, quick fingers, heading south, heading east, home, 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 and the coasts swing upward, the old ridiculous curvatures of earth, the knuckles, hills, the mangrove swamps, the desert emptiness. In their sterile housing they tilt towards these like skiers, taxiing in on the long runways, the howl of their homecoming rises, surrounding them like their last moments, the mash, the splendour. Then fading at length as they move on to small towns where dogs in the frozen sunset raise muzzles in mute salute, and on to cities in whose wide web of suburbs telegrams tremble like leaves from a wintering tree, and the spider grief swings in his bitter geometry. They are bringing them home now, too late, too early.
During your years in the Air Force, you settled down and got married. How did you meet your wife?
Well, she was the switchboard operator at the Air Force base that I was posted to in Toowoomba. I was one of those guys who had to relieve on switch at weekends. I don't know that I was very good as a relief switch operator, but at least I kind of, I met her then, and I liked her very much, and so we kept pretty quiet while we were on base, but eventually decided to get married. Yeah, it was all in the first year, actually. And it's been, of course, a great thing because she's both a good critic and been a wonderful wife and a wonderful mother to the kids, and they think the world of her too. So, again, I've been terribly lucky. I mean, one looks around and sees that it's not always the case, in fact less and less the case, so there's nothing to say that I deserved any better than lots of other people who didn't get as good.
The stability that had come into your life allowed you to complete your degree and become a teacher. Has teaching English literature at university affected your poetry?
The very fact of being a teacher means that you're a metaphor user. Your metaphors, your analogies, the inevitable bridges that teachers make between their experience and that of students, so that some traffic can sort of go both ways across whatever dark and troubled waters there are. And so in a sense, I often thought using metaphors in the process of teaching, I was possibly running the risk of exhausting my sort of my reserve bank of metaphors and images and so on. But the other thing is that I think you get a lot back. Incidentally, you get back the forced education that you have to give that you have to get as well as give. And I think that was important for me because I think I may have pointed out before I was undisciplined as a sort of reader in my teenage years, and university studies forced me to read things and think more consecutively than I would have otherwise. And then teaching also forces on people, however undisciplined they are, certain sort of formal requirements. And that again I think was good for me. It kept a bit of, if I can use the term, tone in my intellectual muscles.
Australian universities recognize their debt to the past. Their own
The physical act of writing a poem Do you have a particular way of going about it?
Pretty haphazard, actually. I take it as it comes, so I'll try something out, and maybe sitting at the dining room table. I've never had a study, so even when I did studies as a formal sort of activity, I did them either in the kitchen or in the dining room. The television's usually on, or the radio may be on, and there was often, when the kids were home, activities. And they seemed to me to be a natural. Nobody ever got shushed or told the master is creating, or that sort of nonsense. So things went on with their activities, and dogs and cats wanted to be fed and tickled under the chin and so on, and you accepted that as part of the free flow of demands that you had to meet. For me, poetry is a kind of is a common sort of daily activity, and even when it comes to recognition, I always think you have to leave the recognition, whatever praise or condemnation you've received, and go out into the workaday world and justify the rest of your life. So life comes first, art comes second, and I think that's the way it always has to be for me. This poem is about my mother-in-law and the circumstances of her death. I loved her very much, and the poem's called Going, and it's just about the way she died at a barbecue. And I think it was the way she would have, if she had to choose a way, this is the way she would have preferred to go, with her family and grandkids around her. Mum, you would have loved the way you went. One moment at a barbecue in the garden, the next falling out of your chair, hamburger in one hand, and a grandson yelling. Zip! The heart's roller blind rattling up, and you in an old dress, quite still, flown already from your dearly loved linden, leaving only a bruise like a blue kiss on the side of your face, the seed beds incredibly tidy, grass daunted by drought. You'd have loved it, Mum, you big spender. The relatives' eyes narrowed with grief, swelling the rooms with their clumsiness, the reverberations of tears, the endless cuppers and groups revolving, blinded as moths. The joy of your going, the laughing reminiscences, snagged on the pruned roses in the bright blowing day.
Do you think that some of the strength, and particularly the humour of your poetry, comes from the fact that you won't take the whole thing too seriously?
That could be so, I think. I think it also matches up with something in the Australian temperament which says it's a big country, and we're kind of thinly spread here, and epic voices and monumental kind of percussions are not really going to be amount to much. So let's try and do what we can with a certain sort of modesty as to how much we'll achieve, and whether, if we sound a note in Toowoomba, they'll hear it at Uluru. That's the kind of approach I have. So it never dismays me to know that people say, oh, look, I've never heard of you, I never heard you. I say, that's fine. The world's full of people who've never heard of people, and it doesn't do either of them any kind of harm. And I appreciate that. That suits me fine. I like that approach.
And yet your poems have been enormously popular with the public. They've sold more than any other Australian poet since C.J. Dennis. Have you written them with the sense that you're giving voice to the ordinary man's view of the world?
Not consciously. I wrote, I wrote as I wrote. I didn't have any sense of it having a resonance beyond my immediate concern with expressing myself. But I don't believe, for example, that suburbia is just full of crummy little people who make love to their cars on Sunday morning. I think that's a crazy sort of view of life, and it's a simplistic left-wing view that I never did share. And as a person who never had a car, I suppose it might be easy for me to say. But I don't hold with those sort of derogatory sort of views of any class. I don't have in one sense, a view that one class or another is by definition to be excluded from the human race. One constant in a world of variables, a man alone in the evening in his patch of vegetables, and all the things he takes down with him there where the easement runs along the back fence, and the air smells of tomato vines, and the hoarse rasping tendrils of pumpkin flourish clumsy whips, and their foliage sprawls over the compost box, poising rampant upon the palings. He stands there lost in a green confusion, smelling the smoke of somebody's rubbish burning, hearing vaguely the clatter of a dish in a sink that could be his, a dog, a kid, a far whisper of traffic, and offering up instead, not much, but as much as any man can offer: time, pain, love, hate, age, war, death, laughter, fever.